lesson 5.3. You're on page 302. This lesson is entitled Writing Linear Equations in Point-Slope Form. Point-slope form is another way you can write an equation other than slope-intercept form. Let's read this first part together. Consider the line that passes through the point 2, 3 with a slope of 1/2. Let xy be a second point on your line. You can write an equation relating x and y using the slope formula, with the first point being 2, 3 and the second point being the unknown xy. So they're just saying let 2, 3 be the first point and xy be the second point. You notice they put x and y in for point 2 and 2, 3 in for point 1. You can see here, I'm going to highlight it, that all they're doing is they're taking this information and they're putting it in the slope formula. They then rearrange the slope formula. They just take the x minus 2 and they multiply that on each side, and they get 1/2 times x minus 2 equals y minus 3. Now, you don't have to remember this process of reorganizing, but when you do reorganize, you get what's called point-slope form. This is something you can get in your notes. Point-slope form means you can write an equation with the slope at any point on the line. So that's a big advantage. Point-slope form means you can write an equation with your slope and any point on the line. It looks like what I just highlighted in light blue. You have y minus the first y value, or the one y point, minus the slope, and then in parentheses x minus the x value of your point. Okay? We'll try writing an equation in that form together in just a minute. Okay, so let's try writing an equation in point-slope form. Here's an example. Write an equation in point-slope form of the line that passes through the point -1, 4 and has a slope of -2. All right, let me write down the basic form again. So I'm going to write y minus y sub 1 equals slope x minus x sub 1. And I'm going to write the correct equation in blue. What's my slope? Well, it's right here. My slope is -2, so where you see m, put in -2. My point is -1, 4. So where I see x sub 1, I want to put in -1, and where I see y sub 1, I got to put in a 4. So let's do that. I have x minus the -1. And over here, for y sub 1, I'll plug in a 4. I have y minus 4. And then I'm going to ask you, think about this. When I write x minus -1, is that the best way to write that out? Wouldn't it be better to have x plus 1 there? So let's write it that way. My final equation would be y minus 4 equals -2, parentheses, x plus 1 for that reason. There's a correct equation in point-slope form. One super important thing about this equation form that you have to know, I put it in red to make clear this is super important. Notice the subtractions, and maybe I'll circle them in red. Notice the subtractions in the formula. When you put numbers in for x sub 1, y sub 1, they will look opposite of what they really are. Look at the problem we just did. X sub 1 was -1 and y sub 1 was 4, but look at the final equation. Do you notice how, because we put a -1 and subtracted it, actually turned into +1? And when we put a 4 in there, because we're subtracting, it looks like a -4. When you use this equation form, the numbers that you put in, when they're done, will look opposite of what they really are. Okay, next, We're going to, in the homework you'll notice, they will ask you to graph an equation in point slope form. So let's try graphing this. I wrote the equation from the book on my graph paper. Let's graph this. Now remember, this is the part that I have to keep reminding you of. In point slope form, these numbers will look backward or opposite of what they really are. So here's the form. I'm writing it on my screen, which means the point X, and let me highlight it, this point must have been positive 2, and this point here, which I'll highlight in yellow, must have been positive 1 because it says negative 1. So this equation has the point 2, 1. Well, let me graph it. 2 right, 1 up. And now here's the next step, the slope. You guys can say it out loud. What's the slope of this problem? Negative 1. All right, if negative 1's the slope, let me apply that slope. So I got to go, negative 1 means negative 1 over 1. That means I got to go down 1 over 1 and put a point, down 1 over 1, put a point. I'll do that a few more times. All I have to do now is get my ruler out and draw a line, and there's the line for that equation. Point slope form means I can plot a point, I can apply the slope, and there's my line. At the bottom of page 303, let's now try to write an equation in point slope form of the line that passes through these 2 points. Here's the 3-step process we have to follow. Do you notice they did not tell me the slope? I got to find the slope first. I got to pick one point because point slope form means pick a point and the slope, and then write your equation. So let's do that process. Let's get our slope. I'll do it in blue. My slope, that's easy enough. I got to take my y's and subtract them. So 3 minus 4, let me circle my y's. I'm subtracting my y's on top. And then my x's would be 2 minus 4 in the denominator, and I'm getting negative 1 on top, negative 2 on the bottom. The slope is a half. So I'll find the slope. The slope's a half. Next, I got to pick one point. Maybe I should highlight the word 1. I don't have to pick both points. I got to pick one. It doesn't matter what point you pick. Did everybody hear me? It does not matter. So I tell you what, I'm going to pick the point 2, 3. I think it looks easier. Let me write my correct equation down here at the bottom in black. So y minus 3 would equal the slope of a half, x minus 2. All I did is I took my slope and I plugged it in for m, and I took 2, I plugged it in here, and 3 there. There's my final equation. These problems on a test could have 2 answers. Could you have picked the other point? Yes, you could have. So if you picked the other point, you would have had the equation y minus 4 equals 1/2 x minus 4. If you had used the point 4, 4, you would have had the equation I wrote here, and here's the deal, you would have had a correct answer also. Either one of these equations would be a correct answer. Let's keep moving. When you have story problems, it might be even easier to set these up in point slope form, which I will show you here. In this problem, you are designing a sticker to advertise your band. A company charges $225 for the first 1,000 stickers and $80 for each additional 1,000 stickers. And then we have to write an equation. I'll get to that more in a minute. The first thing we have to do is we have to identify the slope and we need a point. The slope, remember, is the rate of change. They tell me the rate of change, I highlighted it in yellow. It's $80 for every additional 1,000 stickers. Now, you might notice in the wording of the problem, they want me to write an equation where the cost is a function of the number of tickets or stickers in thousands. So they wrote it's $80 per 1,000 stickers. So the rate of change for this problem is 80. So 80 is the slope. Maybe I should write that off to the side. 80 is the slope. Okay, next, I need a point. It's $225 for the first 1,000 stickers. So 1,000 stickers, I'll use 1 for 1,000, would have to be $225. Can everyone see a slope and 1 point? Isn't that all I need for point slope form, a slope and point? Okay, so next. Well, before I put that up, let me just highlight. Next, can you see here in the book, they plugged 80 in for slope, and they plugged in the point 1 and 225. Now, there's one last thing I have to go through with you on this. If you, on a quiz or test, left your answer like what I'm circling here, I would definitely give you a passing grade for that problem, but I could not give you an A for the reason I have marked, and maybe I'll highlight it up here in yellow. When they say write an equation so that the cost is a function of the number of stickers, that means you have to write your final equation in slope-intercept form. In other words, you got to get y by itself. Do you notice how they did not use x and y, they used s and c, but right now c is not by itself. It's easy to get c by itself. All you have to do is add 225 to each side. And then if you just, let me work this out over here. If we distribute and simplify, my pen isn't working great here. Let's distribute and simplify here. 80 s minus 1 so if I distribute, combine my like terms right here, I would have 80s plus 145, and you can see that right here. So the cost would be 80s plus 145. When they ask you to write an equation so that something is a function of something, that means don't leave it in point slope form. That means get y by itself. So you'd have to quickly distribute, get c by itself in this case, and write your final equation. Get y by itself. Okay? Write a real-world linear model from a table. Linear model means equations. Let's look at this. The table shows the cost of visiting a working ranch for 1 day and night for a different number of people. Can the situation be modeled by a linear equation? I got to answer that first. Well, here's how you can tell. We've already practiced this before. We have to see if the slopes are the same. So you notice they took those two ordered pairs. They took the ordered pair 4, 250 and 6, 350, and they figured out the slope right here. They figured out the slope was 50. They then, I'll use a different color, they then took those 2 points and they figured out the slope, and they figured out it was 50 again. And then they took these 2 points, I know the yellow's a little bit harder to see, they put it in the slope formula. Do you notice how the slope is always 50 no matter what 2 points you pick? That means that this is a linear equation. So if it's linear, you can write an equation in point slope form. So that's what they do next. You see point slope form here. They decided, and I'm going to highlight it, they decided to put, well, the slope is 50, so I didn't decide. The slope you can see up here is always 50, so they put 50 in for m. I'll highlight that in yellow. And they took, I'll highlight this in purple, they took the point 4, 250, they plugged in 4 for P sub 1 and 250 for C sub 1, and there's their equation. Now, remember, we want to write this so that the cost is a function of the number of people in the group. That means we've got to get Y by itself. In this problem, Y is C. So let me just quickly do that. So C minus 250 would equal, it says 50 equals P minus 4. Let me quickly distribute. So 50P minus 200 would equal C minus 250, and if I add the 250 to each side to get C by itself, I end up with C equals 50P plus 50, and that's what the book has. So now I have my equation written so that the cost is a function of the number of people. If you left your equation like that, again, I would give you a C for that. I would not give you an E because you do have a correct equation, but you got to get the Y value by itself when they give you that direction. I'm going to stop the video here because we've covered everything I need. If you have questions, make sure you ask in class.